Thank you for that generous presentation, and thank you for the invitation to the conference. I would like to say that I'm working on this with a colleague from Chile, Nancy Nichols, who works at Universidad Católica de Chile. She was unable to come, but I wanted to mention this because this is a joint project that we're developing. So, in this paper, we analyze and compare the memories of two Holocaust survivors, Ino Treb, who after the war emigrated to Mexico, and Rudy Hyman, who emigrated to Chile. Both have given testimony in various occasions and in different public venues. Additionally, they have been interviewed by oral history projects such as the Shoah Foundation and Voices of the Shoah Fundación Memoria Viva. Rudy published his memoir in 2005, and Ino is currently writing his. Both are alive and have been interviewed on multiple occasions by the writers of this paper. Even if Holocaust memories are likely to remain unchanged, as Christopher Browning finds in Remembering Survival, one may also observe important variations. In this paper, we examine what remained constant, what changed, and why. In what ways the passing of time and the spatial geographic context impact the enunciation of remembrances and their meanings? How do global phenomena and discourses shape these memories? And how do methodological interventions and formats not only influence these memories, but also the ways of accessing them? We want to test the notion that memories are not only repressed, secret, communal, and public, but also protected. By this notion, we mean that sensitive memories may be regarded by the survivor as particularly shameful, painful, and intimate, thus requiring shielding from a potentially moral public judgment. These are unacceptable, uncomfortable, or uneasy memories that involve family, political decisions, and moral ambiguity. Protected memories are not traumatic memories that have been repressed. Instead, they are latent memories that can be narrated. Nevertheless, for the reasons above mentioned, the survivor may prefer not to make them public. Their enunciation may take place with children or other family members, close friends, and implicated listeners. While this notion was originally coined by Natasha Zaretsky to refer to the sharing of their stories among members of generations of the Shoah community in Argentina, we use it in relation to a small group of listeners that are trustful, empathetic, and genuinely interested. According to Holocaust scholars, time and the passing of historical actors directly involved in a particular event explain why secret or communal memories may become public. While these are important factors in the testimonies of both Ino and Rudy, they do not explain how public memories may turn into protected ones, while protected memories may be highly resistant to change. What interests us is precisely this dynamic process of opening and closing, strategies of sharing, and ways of accessing protected memories. I will now introduce the interviewees. Ino, by the way, I'm using a pseudonym that he himself chose. Ino was born in 1933 in Lodz, Poland. He was the oldest of two sons of a middle-class and assimilated Jewish family. Ino started going to a private, non-religious Jewish school when the war began and interrupted his education in first grade. Until that moment, he remembers a happy childhood. For him, things started to change when, following the outbreak of the war, the Germans entered Lodz. The first signs of feeling any different from other Poles came with anti-Jewish laws. As a young child, he did not understand or knew what was happening. Soon after, Ino was forced into the Lodz ghetto with his family, where he stayed until its liberation in 1945, thus being one of the last 877 survivors of the ghetto. He lived in Lodz until 1946, when his parents decided to emigrate to Mexico. But instead, they arrived in Venezuela in 1947. Ino came to Mexico in 1960 when he married a Mexican Jewish woman. Rudy Hyman was born in Berlin in 1921 in a middle-class Jewish family that was cultured and assimilated. Like Ino, he remembers having a happy childhood. When he turned 11 years old, Rudy's life began to change. With the gradual implementation of the Nuremberg laws, a shadow of uncertainty overcame him. In search of an identity that was denied by Nazism, Rudy joined Hashomer Atzair. When one of its clandestine meetings was discovered by the Nazis, Rudy was forced to sign in the police station until he obtained a visa to exit Germany. Rudy left to Palestine in October 1938, where he became a pioneer in kibbutz Beit Zera, later joining the Palmach. In 1942, Rudy joined the British Army, complying with military intelligence tasks in North Africa. He was then sent to Italy to liberate Rome. After the war, his parents, who had escaped Germany in December 1939, began to do the paperwork so that Rudy could reunite with them in Chile. In 1948, 10 years after leaving Berlin, Rudy arrived to Chile, where he lives until today. An analysis of their various testimonies shows that in both cases, the core of their narratives, including essential facts and chronological logic, remain constant. Memories are crystallized when they are emotional and sensorial. The changes observed include the addition of details, nuances, or complementary information. I will illustrate with Ino's testimony. In the first interview conducted in 1996, Ino mentions how the final moment of departure to the ghetto came, in his own words, one day, probably in April 1940, when he was sick with fever at home. A German military man came in shouting, "Raus, raus, out, out." Ino's mother began to cry and convinced the German officer to let them stay one more day. This remembrance is recovered in the second interview of 2017, and in both cases it is associated with the shouts of the German officer and Ino's intense fear. The sequence of events and the agency of his mother also remain constant elements. In his memoir, in the interview conducted by Fundación Memoria Viva, as well as in the interview done by Nancy Nichols in January 2019, Rudy refers to the encounter with the only survivor from his family that remained trapped in Germany. His uncle Fritz. It is one of the most painful narrations in his testimony. It has a relevant place told with calm and details. The encounter took place in 1945, after the end of the war, when the uncle was back from Terezin. At the time, Rudy was a member of the British Army and was authorized by his commander to travel from Rome to Berlin. In his memoir, Rudy writes that every time he asked about relatives or acquaintances, Uncle Fritz said, "Nach dem Osten," sent to the east, and that this conversation took place on several occasions, as if it were, in his own words, a masochistic exercise. Rudy had emigrated to Palestine in 1938, and although in his role as soldier of the British Army he received news of the concentration camps during the war, the magnitude of the Holocaust seemed unbelievable. It was only at the end of the war, when his companions visited Dachau and came back telling what they saw, that Rudy began to comprehend it was a genocide. The emotional encounter with his uncle is also expressed when he finds out that one of his relatives had not been sent to the east, but committed suicide before the Nazis came looking for him. In the 2019 interview, Nancy asked him about the conversations he had with his uncle, and in particular about the phrase "nach dem Osten." Rudy responded, "It was very short, almost cruel, symbolic, towards the east. This was the last day when he was seen, when he presented himself in the plaza, and there every trace was lost." And he added, "Listening to the uncle was traumatic." He pauses. "No, it was terrible to hear this, and at the same time to be in a unit that had to catch this man and hang him and not have authorization to do it. I prefer not to remember." In this interview, there are three elements that are not present in the previous ones. First, Rudy recognizes that listening to his uncle was traumatic for him. Second, he talks about how terrible it was to listen to his uncle and not being able to do justice. As a member of the Allied and victorious army, Rudy was in a different position from other Jewish victims. He had been able to act against Nazism, contributing to its defeat. Thirdly, Rudy chooses not to tell the painful encounter with the uncle and closes his answer to Nancy's question, telling, "I prefer not to remember." Rudy's decision may be related to the fact that in a very old age, he does not want to reopen wounds as a way of self-protection, having given testimony on multiple occasions in the past in frameworks that allow to make this testimony public. It is possible that he may no longer regard it as an imperative, the duty of memory. Thus, the painful area that he was able to overcome in the 2005 interview, he evades in this later one. The duty of memory has been one of the most recognized elements among survivors of the Holocaust, as argued by Dori Lau. Ino, in contrast to Rudy, has not transitioned from opening to closing, but instead has remained protective of his most sensitive memories. In the first interview conducted by the Shoah Foundation in 1996, Ino talks about the Judenrat and the Jewish police in a detached way, that is, as the objective narrator of a collective Jewish experience in the ghetto. When asked by the interviewer about his personal memories of the Judenrat and the Jewish police, Ino avoided answering the question. In the 2017 interview, Ino remains personally detached, but morally engaged, when describing the task of these historical actors: raids, lists, corruption, favors. In this second interview, he was asked if members of his family or anyone he knew participated in the Judenrat or the Jewish police. Ino blushed and asked to stop the filming. Both blushing and asking to stop the filming seem to be indicators of untold sensitive memories. When the filming continued, Ino adhered to his role of narrator. As far as I know, they were people that took advantage, very selfish, very I, and their immediate family. The majority became extremely wealthy, abusing their power. Nevertheless, in the more intimate and private spaces of the pre-interview questionnaire, behind the filming, during casual encounters and the writing of his memoir, Ino has decided to share. In a long-term exchange between interviewer and interviewee, subtle hints gradually turn into complete opening. For the interviewer, these hints retroactively acquired a different meaning. From the survivor's point of view, the interviewer became trustful and genuinely interested in his story. Thus, sharing was possible, while it also made him feel really good. These are his words. But even today, Ino still chooses to protect his family members from public knowledge. Another protected memory by Ino is that of his immigration to Latin America. I should mention that little is still known about the migration experiences of Holocaust survivors who went to Mexico, especially in the post-war years. Those testimonies of survivors are a very important source to reconstruct this history. Based on information he obtained from his parents and maternal uncle, who became their main post-war helper, Ino shares the following story. After the war, they returned to their apartment in Lodz until the environment of loss, communism, and anti-Semitism led his parents to emigrate. While they did not have a preference where to go, they had an uncle who lived in Mexico and persuaded them to move there. They traveled from Lodz to Paris by train, holding a Polish passport and an affidavit. They waited 6 months in Paris, living in a hotel paid by joint, until they finally left by ship to New York, by train to Miami, and by plane to Caracas, Venezuela, their final destination. In the 1996 interview, Ino briefly says that they stayed in Poland until 1946, but decided to emigrate because the situation, in his own words, got worse with the communists and anti-Semitism was growing. They went to Paris and from there to New York. In his own words, ending up in Caracas, Venezuela. I quote, "the only country at that time that took us in." In the 2017 interview, the interviewer is more interested about his migration story, thus leaving more time to prompt Ino about this topic. But Ino keeps the same narrative of migration, only adding that his parents would have liked to emigrate to the United States, but were unable to do so because of the restrictive quota for Poles and the long wait. In this interview, he adds important information to understand migration networks, migration trajectories, and policies of immigration in the post-war years. He tells the story that his mother had a brother in Mexico who offered them to join him. He sent them an affidavit, which was proof of the granting of their visas by the Mexican government. This allowed them to get a passport in Warsaw and officially leave Poland to Paris, where they stayed 6 months. But I quote, "Mexico did not allow anyone to enter. Immigration was closed." End of quote. When asked about why they immigrated to Venezuela, Ino gives some hints regarding the political dimension of their story. He tells that as a journalist, his uncle knew Rómulo Gallegos, a Venezuelan writer. He mentioned to Gallegos the problem he faced to bring his family from Europe and to Mexico. He concludes by saying that in the end, his parents did not want to wait any longer and decided to immigrate to Caracas. Similar to his narrative of the Judenrat and the Jewish police, Ino chooses to protect this memory and only share it in the privacy of space and close friendship. While this is not a shameful or painful situation for his family, it is political, morally charged, and personal. It directly involves his uncle, but also his present country of residence. Thus, publicly sharing this memory could be regarded, in his view, as an ungrateful act or a suspicious attempt to question the local government. Both give Ino an uneasy feeling, even so many years after the event and the passing of politicians, his uncle, and his own parents. The question that remains is, why is he willing to say that Mexico was closed to immigrants, which stands in contradiction to the still prevalent myth that Mexico was a country of open doors? Would his immigration story be told in a different way if he gave his testimony in Venezuela rather than Mexico? When asked about this way of telling his family stories, Ino explains, and I quote, "One narrative protects the other one. I do not lie, I only choose to omit some information." End of quote. While the experiences of Ino and Rudy during the war years were very different, both Holocaust survivors immigrated to Latin American countries after the war, have given testimony in multiple occasions, and continue witnessing in the present. Ino is almost 86 years old, while Rudy is 97. The two survivors publicly shared their testimony for the first time between the second half of the 90s and the first decade of the 21st century. In this period, the memory of the Holocaust had a strong presence in several European countries and the United States, thus legitimizing the voice of the witness. Holocaust testimony was even considered the most genuine and complete representation of the past. In the case of Rudy, his memories may be situated in a context in which Chile was experiencing a strong and gradual process of memorialization of the civic-military dictatorship, which took place from 1973 to 1990, with special emphasis on the victims of human rights violations. During the 1990s and until today, the voice of survivors of the Chilean dictatorship has won legitimacy so that human rights violations of the past are recognized by the national society. Since the 1990s, academic investigations on the memory of the dictatorial regime of Pinochet proliferated, making theoretical connections with the memory of the Holocaust. Thus, in 2005, the date of Rudy's published memoir, there was a favorable context for the enunciation and the reception of testimonies of the Holocaust. While in Mexico we have not experienced a memory boom like in Chile, the past 2 decades were characterized by significant change. Democratization and multiculturalism favored the insertion of the Holocaust in the public sphere, largely through the opening of the Memory and Tolerance Museum in Mexico City. It was also at that time that the oral history project of the History of the Shoah Visual Foundation was conducted in Mexico. This provided Holocaust survivors with a voice and an audience. Thus, we can state that for Ino and Rudy, the duty of memory became a shared imperative that motivated their enunciation of testimony. While time and place, interview format, and testimonial frameworks, national and global cultural discourses impact the telling, the interaction between interviewer and interviewee seems to have a very strong weight in both cases. However, with the positive aspects that come with it, new methodological challenges emerge. What can be told and how by the interviewer who shares intimate conversations with the interviewee? What should the new thresholds of protection be once the story is shared with implicated listeners? Do these thresholds vary depending on the particular audience? Is it okay to share Ino's protected memories with a group of researchers that are well aware of the sensitive issues involved? What is the duty of the interviewer who on the one hand becomes the guardian of the survivor's memories, but on the other hand becomes the transmitter of the survivor's story in relation to truth-telling and moral integrity? These are some of the methodological issues that we face as we try to understand what happened to Ino's family in the Lodz ghetto and after the war, and how his family immigration story might reveal a deviant pattern, and thus a very important one to be told. Thank you.